A very, very warm welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Viar. I'm the founder of the Women's Chapter, and today I'm joined by Michelle Viar. We practiced this before and I messed it up. Michelle is the founder of Thoroughbrand Digital, and I'm very proud to say our digital partners for the Women's Chapter. As you're joining us, please make sure that you are on mute. And we will be recording this, so you'll receive a link to this afterwards. But Michelle, I'm incredibly grateful that you've made time to join us today. I know that you've spent a lot of time putting together the most incredible presentation for everybody. We've got a lot of content to get through, and we are going to be focusing specifically on, and this is the first part of a series of 3 events that we're going to be doing together. The focus today is specifically on knowing your audience. And I think this is something you and I, when we were putting together the content for this and thinking about how we would structure this series, it was something you were saying from your experience is a very, very common pitfall that brands and business owners make when they're addressing their digital strategy, and kind of can often really waste a lot of time and money if they're not super clear on who their audience is. So, Michelle, I'd like to kick off by asking you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your experience, which is very vast. And I know that you've worked with some major agencies and brands around the world, and you now run Thoroughbrand Digital, working with businesses of all shapes and sizes across all sectors. So, in your own words, can you introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. My name is Michelle, like Michelle said, which is not at all awkward when we get each other's emails. I'm American, obviously, not British. I've been working in digital strategy for about 17, 18 years now, I guess. I've worked in everything from independent sector-specific audiences through to Jellyfish, which is now the largest privately held agency in the world. I was employee 67. They now have almost 3,000 employees, and eventually was head of digital strategy globally there. And then went to WPP, which is one of the 3 biggest advertising groups in the world, and ran Unilever North America for all of the agencies across WPP, with a budget of $447 million a year, which is just stupid money, to be honest with you, and wasted money. And I think that's where a lot of this comes from in terms of the way that we set up Thoroughbrand and the way that we choose to run it, is that we've seen a lot of waste. Myself, 8 of the guys who work for me, and they are all guys, unfortunately, came from Jellyfish, so we've all known each other for a long time, and a few of them have been through Publicis and WPP as well, and have seen just abject waste, and just wanted to bill hours for the sake of it. So we have an audience first approach, which is the reason that we wanted to start with this particular presentation in the series that we're going to do, because we feel like if you approach things from an audience first, it helps you shape your strategy, your budgets, your messaging, and everything else that goes along with it. So that's what we're going to go through today. The presentation, I have a few little case studies in it at the beginning, but at the end, there are things you could take away. I've done an instructive guide of ways that you can identify your own audiences, with the tools that you should have at your disposal, questions that you need to ask yourself about your brand or product or service. And we're going to hopefully leave time at the end for questions. I do speak very, very quickly when I get into subject matter that I know well. So raise your hand, do whatever you have to do to get my attention if I start to go too fast, but we do want to save questions for the end. Everybody ready?
Amazing. Thank you very much, Michelle.
And
I think you said you were going to go off camera, Michelle, so don't panic, everyone, if you can't see us. I think we're just trying to make sure that the presentation runs as smoothly as possible.
Yeah. So can everybody see my presentation now? Yes? Yeah. Okay, cool. Then I'm going to turn off my video, and I'm just going to go to the presentation, and we're going to go into the slideshow. Can everybody see this?
Yeah, amazing. And Michelle, I think, as you mentioned, if people do have questions and you worry you might forget them, feel free to pop them in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to them at the end. And then also we'll kind of keep an eye if there's anything that's really relevant that needs to be integrated. But over to you, Michelle.
Yeah, obviously that's a really good way to do it, because he may get to the end and forget what you wanted to ask. So if you pop it in the chat, we'll go through the chat at the end.
Yeah.
So what we're going to discuss is, who do you think you are? Okay, because we run into clients who think they're one thing and they find out they're another. The cautionary tale. So then we're going to go through a current case study of mistakes, research, correction, and ultimately success. We're going to do a walkthrough of what you can learn from your own data, free tools that you already have if you have a website, if you have a Facebook account, if you have Instagram, things like that. And then what questions you can ask yourself when you start to think about your brand, your messaging, your audience you're targeting, and ultimately the evolution of where you may end up as a brand. So we're going to start with, where do you think you are? Who do you think you are? This is a case study that I did 12 years ago when I was at Jellyfish. And it's a little bit technology-wise, it's changed because some of the technology is now illegal that we used to do this in certain countries. But the lesson that was learned, I think, by the client was so valuable that we continue to use it as a case study. So this is Pinkberry frozen yogurt. They were founded in California about 16, 17 years ago, or started franchising that long ago. Very health conscious, very sort of stereotypical California brand. No sugar, healthy, and there are certain things we want to achieve. So what they said to us were, our customers are foremost health conscious. They're coming from yoga, Pilates, or CrossFit. These are super healthy people. We know this is where they've been when they come to us. So once they've left those health fitness classes, studios, wherever they may have been, we want to drop coupons into their cell phones by SMS. Still possible, still happens a lot of places. It's especially prevalent in the Far East and Southeast Asia and the Middle East. But they wanted us, in partnership with Google, we were Google partners then. As an agency, we're Google partners now, to geofence, which basically means putting up beacons that capture every cell phone signal that goes into a perimeter. And by doing that, you can actually drop a cookie into these people's browser on their mobile phone and follow them wherever they go, creepy as it sounds, and then deliver them a text coupon. And so Pinkberry said to us, we want you to geofence some yoga, Pilates, and CrossFit studios in Southern California where they're based as a trial. So then we can send them mobile coupons to their perceived ideal target audience. And perceived and perception is going to come up a lot today. They thought by doing this, they would see an influx of customers visiting their stores fresh from their workouts. So again, perceived is the operative word here. This is who they thought they were going to target. But we are, as I said, a very performance-centric agency. Digital media is expensive. The last thing that you want to do is spend too much money on impressions or money itself, or alienate an audience with the wrong messaging. You really want to make sure you're targeting the right people. And the last thing we ever want to do is waste money. So instead of targeting these fitness studios, we decided, instead of ring fencing them and seeing where people were going, we decided instead to geofence and ring fence a few Pinkberry locations in Southern California to see where those customers went to after Pinkberry and came from when they got to Pinkberry. And what we found was not remotely what Pinkberry was expecting. Their most frequent customers were not the previously presumed health conscious or yoga mom persona. They already had personas done as a company, which is really important. I'm a persona evangelist. If nothing else, I actually construct personas for some really high-flying companies around the world. And it's something that's so important because it helps you craft everything, but we're going to get into more of that in the next section. They'd already done their own, which is great, completely applaud that. But they just assumed these were health conscious yoga moms. But instead, what we found is that these people almost exclusively had paid visits to unhealthy food outlets, such as Five Guys and In-N-Out Burgers, on their path to purchase before they went to Pinkberry. So actually, their largest audience was a persona we created for them as a result of this, called the meal choice justifier. These are people who thought, I've had a burger, so now for dessert, I'll have some fat-free frozen yogurt because surely that will negate all of the calories in the burger and fries. And it was a completely different target audience, not how they set themselves up as a brand, not what they thought about themselves as a brand. But by doing this, by geofencing the locations and using browser drop technology, we increased footfall in Pinkberry stores by 2.6 times in just 90 days. We saved them tens of thousands of potentially wasted dollars and impressions. So that's really just the cautionary tale that we use when people say, I know my audience, I know who they are. Before we start any engagement, we really look heavily at your data that you already own to see who your audience actually is, because a lot of people aren't familiar with how to gather their own data. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit in a second. But first, we're going to go through a current case study to see what this means from a financial detriment point of view and from a sort of a branding point of view. So how does this apply in practice? We had a major global luxury retailer come to us and say, we need to entirely overhaul our paid social activity. So paid Facebook, paid Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok to a lesser degree. And what we found, again, because we start every engagement really digging through their data and looking at what they have available to them, is that they had changed, this is not in the notes here, but I'll tell you as context, they had changed their teams about 2 years before all of this started to happen, maybe about 3 years before all of this started to happen. And people who had been there for a long time with the company from the beginning had been replaced with much younger people who had a completely different view of what they wanted the brand to be. Not what the brand was or financially what the brand could bear, but what they wanted it to be. And as a result of that, what they had done is they had started really targeting the people who browsed their products rather than the people who bought their products. So we call this browsers versus buyers. And this is something that you can actually segregate in your own Google Analytics account. I'm going to show you that later. But just for them financially, online sales to men had fallen 18% in 2 years. Women in the age groups 35 to 44, which by the way, and 35 to 44 and 55 to 44 were their most lucrative age groups buyers. All three of these age groups had fallen on average more than 30%. It was actually 32%. That's massive for a global retailer. Interestingly, these groups had been lost as well from nearby markets. So not just the UK, but also from France and Germany, which should never fall off when you're as near as they are. They're based in London, and from the US as well. The US market had grown as a whole, as a market, but just about volume, not by targeting the right people, as had the UK. But South Korea, which used to be their second largest market, had fallen by 30%, Hong Kong by more than 40%, and it was a huge market for them, while China had remained flat. Japan had grown a little bit, but it had by no means, it was single digits. It hadn't covered the losses in Korea and Hong Kong. And Middle Eastern countries didn't represent the level of revenue of the UK or US or near markets. They were massively profitable. So this brand used to, during the summer months, when the influx of Middle Easterners came to London to cool off during the summer, they used to do all sorts of partnerships. They did partnerships with luxury hotels to have receptions for these visitors, to put vouchers in their hotel rooms. They did partnerships with Coutts Private Bank to make sure that people were actually keeping the brand front of mind. And under this new regime, all of that had gone away. So they'd really lost not just really important customers, but they lost substantially in profit. So this sort of tells you, how does poor or no targeting impact your success? Because in some cases, it's not just poor targeting, it's no targeting. It's just throwing everything at a wall to see what sticks. So in practical ways, such as wasting money, targeting people not interested in your good or services. Obviously, if you're just targeting everybody, you're throwing a lot of money away. You can also, some people do, we've seen them, we've taken over accounts where they're targeting entire countries instead of postcodes on every single platform that you can use: Google Ads, Facebook ads, Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, TikTok. You can target down to postcode level. So you can also target ages, age groups, specific income levels. Income levels is not available across all platforms, but it is the majority. And not targeting. So this is a massive loss, really, financially and time. You're spending time constantly trying to find the right audiences, when if you'd refined and honed your data and audience to begin with, you would have started your success a lot quicker in the process. So poor targeting also impacts success by not targeting the people most likely to convert at the right time of day or day of week, or on the right platform, or with the right tone of voice or message. And thereby you either miss them completely because you're there at the wrong time and in the wrong place, or you're alienating them with your messaging. In the particular case of this retailer, they were doing both. So in fact, they were scheduling their organic posts 4 times a day within 15 minutes of each other in the middle of the day UK time, which was about 5 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast in the US and in the middle of the night in Asia. So they were really, and honestly, in the middle of the day in the UK, not that many people who are their high value customers online either. They also had the wrong messaging. They had the wrong creative. It was just, it was all of these things. If you tailor your creative to the entirely wrong audience, you also alienate people, more buyers, but you get more browsers. And that's what we don't want. We don't want people who look at it and go, oh, that's pretty, and then click through to the site and think, it's it's aspirational in a way, but if they're never going to actually buy your product, then we don't want to waste ad dollars on them. It also disables you from retargeting the best audiences effectively because you don't understand what resonates and motivates each member of your audience to convert. If you start out, even if you just start with one persona, I don't care. What will happen over time is that you'll start to see that break apart, and you'll start to see certain segments of it respond to different messaging. You can test messaging A/B against one another, creative, and see what really helps. So ultimately, the whole point of good targeting, aside from meeting your audience where they are and when they're there with the messaging that resonates, is that good targeting helps you find and refine your audience whilst building more data around your audience. And that's something that we're going to stress even more as we go through this. You have so much data of your own that you probably don't even know about, that you can use to do a lot of this on your own. And data is your biggest friend. It's your best friend. It's your most valuable friend, and you really need to nurture it and use it. But how did we approach this? So we approached this first by looking at the client's own data for insights to who had bought historically and when this respective demographic shift had begun. And it was actually sort of a nosedive off a cliff more than a shift. It had been about 3 years. So we looked back to what had gone on before then versus what happened over time. And then we also looked at the conversations themselves. We operate a practice called online listening, which uses platforms such as Brandwatch and NetBase to listen to conversations about the retailer itself, conversations about the brands that they sell and represent. But instead of listening to the entire conversation was 21.9 million mentions, in the space of 13 months. We usually look at 13-month windows. So 21.9 million mentions and a possible 1.1 trillion impressions. But when you narrow that down to people who first party say, I bought, I am buying, I am considering, or I have bought, that conversation narrows down to just 786,400 mentions over the period of 13 months. So this is what I mean by, I want as a visualization for people to understand the difference between this is the number of people who talk about it, but this is the number of people who actually buy. And when you refine it down to just this audience of 786,000, the savings in ad spend is just phenomenal. But you also see results much more quickly out of the gate because you are in the right place with the right message. So how did we approach this again? Once we narrowed down the prime audiences with the owned data and then identified the conversion conversation elsewhere online, we start to sort of build a composite of who it is we want to target. Once we've done that, the trends start to emerge. With your own data, again, you'll start to see trends emerge with regard to not only where the demographics are, but the conversations they have, where they have them, what time of day, what day of the week, when are they most likely to be browsing online. And there's a different kind of browsing online too. Some people are online all the time. I am, it's my job. But I'm only open to shopping online certain hours of the day. So what we really do with our third-party tools is look to see when these people are online and are of a shopping mindset, not just when they're online in general. But we also want to know what other content they consume. That helps us to sort of build a fuller picture of who they are as an individual, where else they may shop, what else they may read. And it also helps us have a list of websites we can advertise on if we know where they actually are online. We want to know what's important to them in a brand. All of this helps us create perfect tone, content, and tactical targeting plan. These things that are shown here just show the gender breakdown that we found, which was pretty balanced male-female, which is kind of rare in retail, age and interests. But the data that we do goes a lot deeper and shows things that get into very specific things like the books they read, the websites they visit, what matters to them. We have a customer journey tool that tells us, is it customer service? Is it efficiency? Is it quickness? Is it price? Because all of these things, again, help us to build out the customer. What we found in the end, and this is not usual, 6% is not usual. This is an unusually large company. We found 6 different personas which were of high enough value to be treated as separate targeting segments. So what we did is we prioritized them based on the audience with the highest number, so the biggest audience basically, who engages with the client and engages on a regular basis, not just once. So likes, follows, purchases, has some history that we can see a high pool of engagement. And then we did the audience with the greatest conversion rate. So there may be 100 people, 70 of them actually bought. That's a conversion rate, and that's what we want. Then we looked at the audience with the highest average basket value. The basket value for this client was already high, but there were some that were extraordinarily high. And we really wanted to see who those people were and how we could target them and what sort of messaging would resonate with them. Then finally, the audience with the highest average annual value or potential value of each persona to the client. So the audience that actually over the span of 12 months spent the most online. What we found is our number one persona was somebody that we called timeless, the refined and timeless executive. And what we meant by that was that they chose timeless brands. So we have an affinity brand list that goes along with this. I don't think I put it in here. A list of brands they would actually buy as somebody who has sort of more timeless taste, but timeless also in terms of these people have no time. They're quite impatient. They're among the highest average order value. 30% of these people spend $11,000 to $35,000 a year on clothing and accessories. Over 7% of them spent $35,000 to $75,000 a year. These are whales, and they completely neglected and lost almost 40% of their whales in this category. They're difficult to find online en masse. So time of day and day of week charts for each region was incredibly important for targeting purposes. They largely represent the female audience and revenue that had been lost over this 3-year period. And they have the second highest conversion rate. So really, this was our number one audience. And you can see at the top where they're online, their largest motivation for purchase was self-reward. That's really important to know because that helps your messaging. They're not inclined to talk online. These are not trophy buyers. These are not people who buy a Bottega Veneta bag as a treat, as a trophy. They do it for self-reward, but they're really discreet. They're not going to shout about it online. They're more likely to talk about things that help. Like if they find a product that really helps people, they'll talk about it, but they don't talk about luxury goods online, which makes them a little bit more difficult and makes targeting even more important. In the consideration journey for a product, they'll consider an item for a whole lot longer than any other persona. So they'll add to basket, but then keep browsing for other items, comparing, evaluating for purchase. So abandoned cart targeting is extremely important for this persona. An email that says, hey, you left something in your basket. Do you want a 10% discount? They spend the second greatest amount of time on the purchase itself, but are fairly dispassionate throughout the process. There's not a huge passion or intensity quotient that goes along with this journey. They're very analytical and matter of fact. And then they have great passion about loyalty. It's to the brands they buy rather than to the retailers that they buy them from. So if it works, they'll go back to the brand again and again, rather than exploring new ones. So if they buy Max Mara, they're going to look for Max Mara. They're not necessarily going to go back to the same shop. And the top countries are the US, UK, France, Germany, Korea, Australia, and China, though they hadn't really converted. So how did this end for us? On the left, you can see how we actually, from ad sets, this is from Meta, did an analysis of the return on ad spend. A 9-time return on ad spend is outstanding for anything, but our lowest was almost 3 times return on investment for ad spend. So by identifying personas and implementing them as target audiences for the campaigns, we delivered unprecedented results. We had a 79% increase in average order value, so that's basket value, and a 6.5 times increase in return on ad spend across all paid social and all key markets. So again, we cut their budgets down by about 30% per month in terms of what they were spending on their ad campaigns. So all of this sounds great. But the main question I get asked is, that sounds fabulous, Michelle, but the tools you use are super expensive, and they are. So how can we do this ourselves? We can't afford the research project. We can't afford the big research tools. So how can we better identify our prime audiences using what we have or can access? So in terms of free, Google Analytics is your best friend. Meta has great analytical insights if you know where to find them. And then when I say with paid campaigns, if you run paid campaigns on Meta, the Facebook IQ audience insights, and that does wrap up Instagram as well, are phenomenal for paid campaigns. And Twitter analytics are actually some of the best they are after paid campaigns. So we're just going to talk through a little bit of what you can do on your own. I'm going to warn you, this next section might be a little bit of heavy going from a Google Analytics point of view. I think a lot of people are scared of Google Analytics. But I'm going to start this by saying, if you don't have it installed on your site, you need to fire your agency. It's a free tool. GA is completely free. The reason it's free, Google wants your data. But at the same time, every single thing that you do can be plugged in to Google Analytics. Your Facebook traffic, your Instagram traffic, your Twitter, Pinterest, TikTok, Google ad campaigns, everything can be filtered through Google Analytics and give you a view of everything that you need to know. And again, it's a free tool. Most people do have it on their websites if you've had your site built by an agency, but if you don't, it's something that you need to install. It will not go retrospectively. It will only start from the day that you install it. So you're only going to get data from that day. And the other thing that I would say as a cautionary tale is if you do have something like Google Analytics, make sure that you're the owner of the account and the admin of the account. So you don't have to go asking somebody else for it if you part ways with your agency or an employee. Same thing for Facebook, Instagram, everything. Make sure that you own your accounts, not someone who is a partner who works for you. That's really super important, because if you lose it, you lose it forever. So this is the audience view of Google Analytics. What I would say is that if it's already set up for you, you can't break it. There's nothing, I know it's intimidating to look at. If you've never been in it, you'll be hugely intimidated the first time you go in, which is the reason that I've included the screenshots as we go through it. But it's so informative, and you can't, as long as you stay out of this little admin button down here, stay out of there. You can't break anything, and you can explore all you want. And the data is fascinating. You can change the date range here. You can do a comparison of date ranges to compare it to the year before. You can look at it by hour, day, week, or month. You can download dashboards. It's really a super useful tool. But one of the things that we look at in here is audience. And the reason that this is so important is because there's demographics within this audience. So when you go into the audience menu, you go all the way down to demographics. It gives you an overview, a summary, which is what these are from, which includes the age bands who visit your site the most, the gender split of who visits your site the most, and their interest category. And these interest categories are important because these are general IAB, which is Internet Advisory Board, which sort of governs certain aspects of internet advertising. These are standard categories that can be bought as segments in every ad platform there is. So this is really important. It's only 5.5%, but it's 5.5%. And I'm going to show you why this becomes more important as we go through. But again, you can look at, this is just the overview. You can go further and look at just age. Now, again, this is really important. And this is something that people get really, I think, especially intimidated by as we go through GA, is the further it breaks down, you get into more and more data that it provides. And what this really is users, the number of users in this age group, new users, the number of new people, it's their first time coming to your site. It gives you the percentage also in brackets next to it of visits. The number of sessions these people have had, so you might have some repeat sessions. The bounce rate, which is what percentage of people bounce your site less than 12 seconds. And then the pages per session. There are a couple of other things folded into this that are further on, but these are the things that you really need to understand. Who's consuming the most of your content and who's spending the most time on site. In this particular case, the 65 plus is spending the most time on site. Now, granted, this is from a more sort of educational site in the States, so this sort of makes sense to me, a very research-oriented site. Second is 35 to 44. They also consume the highest number of pages on your site. So 1.5 minutes may not sound like a lot, but when you start to think about how much time you spend on a site and make up your mind whether or not it's somewhere you need to go back to or bookmark or hold, 1.5 minutes is actually quite a bit. We do like to see more than 2 pages, but this site has particularly in-depth pages with a lot of writing, so that makes sense as well. When you get into gender, it's the very same thing. It tells you the gender split of visitors to your site, how many are new users versus old users, return users, the number of sessions, the bounce rate, the pages per session, and the time on site. And then further down the audiences menu in Google Analytics, you can get into interests. So interests, the overview again gives you an affinity category and a market segment. A lot of people don't know what affinity categories are. So we talk more in our company about affinity brands than we do affinity categories, because we target way more finitely than just categories themselves. But affinity means it's not the brand that your product, it's not the category that your product or service is in, but people who buy this might also buy that. So people who are interested in this particular brand are also 3.83% of them are also interested in food, dining, cooking enthusiasts, and 30-minute chefs. Another 3.83% are green living enthusiasts. So this is some people who will also do these things, which helps you to refine categories. In market segment means these are people who, these are segments in your category. So this is an educational site in the States. So education, primary and secondary, education, post-secondary. This just tells us really how the audience breaks down into various segments within our own industry. But again, when you think about affinity brands and affinity market segments, this is something that you can do on your own. You can ask yourself, okay, I think my brand is this. I'm going to look at the data and see if I see any patterns. And if my brand, whatever patterns I see, where else do I think this person may shop? What other service do I think my ideal customer might buy? Where else might they go? What else might they do? If I had left the affinity brands in here for the high fashion client, you would have seen cities in Italy, hotels in Italy, luxury cars, luxury watches, retailers in Hong Kong, regional retailers, things like that. So you really want to know where else they shop and what else they do. The reason being, you can target those other brands and their audiences in both Google ads, in Facebook ads, in Instagram ads, in TikTok ads, and in Twitter ads, and in Pinterest. So you really want to know where else they shop and what else they might buy, because again, you're just building a full picture of who your customer is and how you can better target them. Again, when we start to look at the categories, affinity categories, it does the same thing again. New users, returning users, the bounce rate, the pages per session, and the average duration. And then the same thing for the end market segment, so that you really know which of these segments are most in tune with your site and have consumed the most of your content. When we get into meta, so I didn't do any of the paid options for where you can look at data in Meta or in other platforms, because it gets a little bit more complicated. The data, however, is way more in depth. So what's provided here is just the free stuff that's already there for you on your Facebook page, no matter who you are. So if you go into the dashboard on your page, left-hand side audience, it'll give you the age and gender, and it'll give you the location. This is already a head start. So the 54-year-old women are the biggest audience for this, which worries me a little bit because this is my husband's company. And it shouldn't be, since they're an agricultural company. But so 56.3% of them are women from 45 to 54. That's still more than you knew before you looked at this. You might have assumed it, but this is either affirmation of that or it contradicts what you thought. There's really no in between. And it gives you the actual town locations of where all of your visitors come from. You can also look at countries if you need a more broad look at it. This will also give you a potential audience size. So if you combine these two, you can click on a separate tab that says potential audience size if you want to target for ads. And it'll tell you what your potential audience size is, and it'll estimate the size of that audience for you. Instagram, I love. Instagram analytics are the simplest thing on earth. They're in your phone, they're in your Instagram account. It's the little 4-line menu on the upper right-hand side of your Instagram profile screen. So if you go to your own profile, it's there. You go to Insights. It'll give you immediately your top locations, the percentage of people who are from those locations. The last 7, you can change this range here to a custom date range if you want to. You can look at last month, you can look at last year, or you can do a custom range. It'll show you all of your followers in terms of the age range and what percentage they were. It'll do the same thing for gender. But then the thing that I love about Instagram that it does that nobody else does is the time of day and day of the week. And this is a little bit truncated here. If you scroll down your screen and look at this, the hours and the days are there. And from this, you can map when your visitors are actually visiting your profile, interacting with your posts, and you can plan your social media calendar based on when the majority of your followers are online, when they interact, where they are, and who they are. So after all of that, again, you're going to get this deck at the end. So Michelle is going to kindly share this with you so you can sort of walk through all of this at home. But at the end of all of this, there are also some questions. And again, this is just from almost 20 years of experience in this industry, of things that I think sometimes people sort of need to restart and ask themselves. And it's not because I think they're wrong. I don't think that at all. I think that to evolve as a brand, a product, or a service, you have to constantly challenge your preconceived notions. So once you've been through this exercise and you've had a look at what you can in terms of your own free insights, ask yourself, do your audiences in your mind match what you see online? But then also ask yourself, what are you more interested in? Are you interested in financial success or in a strong core of loyal customers? Do you want a sure thing? You're not worried about it being that big, but you want to make sure that you have a strong core of loyal customers who return. So really what we're saying is, do you want volume or do you want certainty? Saying both, or even if you choose one or the other, is likely going to alter pretty substantially who you need to target. Because if you say both, then you're going after an audience with a lot of money who are also very loyal to what they use and what they do. That's a highly defined audience in itself. So that's a characteristics that right away you can say, this is what I want. Then if you say one or the other, you're looking for people who have a higher loyalty threshold or a repeat customer sort of characteristic trait, more so than somebody who just spends a lot of money. But then you can also ask yourself, ultimately, what was your vision? What was your vision when you set up your product, your service, and your brand? Was it about the audience itself? Was there an audience that you specifically had in mind? Or were you a solution? Did you think you were a solution, that your product or brand was a solution? Or were you filling a gap in the market? Because once you ask yourself those things, you can also start to narrow down a little bit what sort of person you're looking for and how you want to talk in your tone of voice as a brand. Who do you think your customers are versus who you expected them to be? So if you wrote down on a piece of paper now, this is who my customers actually have turned out to be. But when I set up my brand a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever the case may be, who did you expect them to be? Has it transpired exactly as you planned? It might have. But likewise, it might not have at all. And some of the biggest brands in the world and the biggest innovations in history have set up as one thing and turned out as another. So you wouldn't be alone in that, and you might just be successful as a result. And lastly, is your product or service used in a way that you didn't plan or expect? This is about flexibility. This is about flexibility of your approach, flexibility of your mindset, flexibility of what you're willing to do to ensure your success. And the interesting thing about this is, if you question your audience, product, or brand and its purpose, it just encourages evolution, like I said. But there are so many well-known products throughout history that were made for one purpose and adapted to another by the public. So Viagra, and by the way, I asked ChatGPT this particular list. I knew it had happened, but I wanted their top 5, and this is what ChatGPT gave me. So Viagra was originally developed as a medication for high blood pressure and angina. Post-it notes, which is an adhesive Post-it note, which I think everybody in the world knows what it is, was developed by 3M in Minnesota, and it was originally developed as a super strong adhesive for use in aircraft construction. Play-Doh, which Michelle and I have in America, they have in South Africa, she thinks they have it here, was developed as a wallpaper cleaner. Bubble wrap, which I didn't know this, was originally developed as a textured wallpaper. And then microwave ovens were only developed for commercial use and very specific commercial use, and then were adapted into the household. So just always evolving and thinking about your audience, your product, your approach is super, super important. And first and foremost, start with the audience. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back into the actual meeting and restart my video, if it will. Ooh. Yeah, it did. So I hope everybody enjoyed it. I see 10 messages in the chat.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was really, really insightful. And I think for me, that's the key takeaway has been kind of to think about how we can better understand the resources that are at our fingertips. And that really, you know, we always hear this message for business owners and for those that are driving businesses that we need to know our numbers. And I think that goes beyond our finances, but also the insights around, you know, who is actually engaging with us, who's buying from us, and how are we interpreting and really utilizing that data.
Absolutely. And if you have a smaller budget and you're just starting out, this data is there, and you can save a lot of money just saying, okay, I think there are 3 target audiences, but I'm going to start with this one because I'm the most certain about it. And then as you build success from there, obviously you make more money, and you have more money to spend on other personas and audiences. But it just is an effective way to look at your business.
Yeah. So I think, Michelle, let's work through the questions. We'll start at the top. So Vivian's asked, how many sales do you need to have to be able to ascertain and narrow down the customer? How do you define this if you're a complete startup and don't have this data?
So if you're a complete startup, then you won't have this data. There's another thing I didn't go into in GA. So in GA, everything that we looked at in Google Analytics, GA, was just people who visited the site. I didn't go in so far as looking at people who had actually bought, because to do that, it's a whole other layer. But the other part of that is if I go into showing you who the actual purchasers are in GA, I'm sharing data from clients that I'm not comfortable sharing. So I didn't go in that far, but you can sort GA by people who've converted or have purchased, and it'll give you the audiences that actually buy. If you're brand new to this, there are some other really good tools, and I meant to put them in here. Sorry, I think it's one of the things I cut out. Google Trends, and I'll add it to the slide before we send out. I'll do a summary of tools at the end. The Google Trends is free. Just put in Google Trends, and it'll take you there, and it'll give you some sort of like statistic of the month. Skip that, and it'll at the top in a little box, it'll say ask a query, and you need to click on that and go, because what you can do is, if you don't know what a trend is or how things are trending or what keywords are buzzy, what kind of content you need to write, it'll break down charts for you for anything from 7 days, 30 days, 6 months, back to 5 years, or you can do a custom range. And it'll show you trends over time for products, for searches, for industries, for all sorts of things. It's a really fun tool to play with. So I would say in terms of trends and insights, you can start there. There's also a tool that used to be free, and I think now it's still relatively cheap, probably 30, maybe 30 pounds a month, called mention.com. And mention.com is an online listening tool similar to the sort of enterprise version of what we use. And Mention will let you monitor conversations about things. So if you say, I want to monitor a conversation about people who need reverse mortgages. I forget what they're called here. They're not called reverse mortgages, but we have a client, which is really bad, and I forgot what they're called. But then I want to see who's having this conversation online. Are people having this conversation online? You can put in that query, and it'll give you a profile of that conversation, the volume of conversation, the other topics that go along with it, the trends in that conversation, the demographics for it. So again, I think there is a free version of mention.com that you can use. And I highly recommend it. And Google Trends. We have over 100,000 pounds of tools, but we still use Google Trends for almost every research deck that we do, because ultimately Google is the #1 holder of data in the world, and Meta is #2. So Google knows more than we do. So we still use that tool all the time. So I would say as a startup, just dig around for free tools, but I would start with those two.
And then Joyce asked, she says, for ethical reasons, they use Plausible on their website. What are your thoughts on its analytical features?
Never heard of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I've never heard of it. How much would you trust this data? We've had some issues with GA misreporting gender and a cost on it. We cross-check everything. We don't trust any one source. And that's the reason that I put so many things in the deck, is because you'll start to see patterns, and you'll start to see things that agree or disagree. But I don't know how you would know that GA is misreporting unless you know who the actual people are who are buying your products, or who are visiting your site, because that's all anonymized. So you can't really know that. But it's supposed to only report on what it knows to be true. It's supposed to only report on, there'll be probably, let's just say out of 100% of visits, if it only can recognize 35% of those as being male or female, it's only supposed to report on 35% of those that it knows to be male or female. So again, I'm not really sure how they would know that it's misreporting. I mean, I'd be happy to look into that for you. But we verify everything anyway, and you are going to find discrepancies. But one of the other reasons you're going to find discrepancies is because people who visit your site may come through organic search, not necessarily via social channel. So you may have, this just happened in the last 2 weeks. We've had 2 different brands who had 56% male visitors to their site and about 75 or 76% female followers and likes on their Facebook and Instagram. So it's also just a usage propensity for genders and for age groups. But I'm actually really fascinated by that question, so I'd like to look into that myself. There'll be some outliers who are not up to date with their profile online, but to put it in context, 0.3% of the world's population is trans. So statistically, the data you'll get will be 99.97% correct for gender. If someone changes job role, again, statistically, it's usually a step up or a side step that keeps them in the same. So true, that's all quite true. And again, from a gender point of view, like we use NetBase and BrandWatch, as I said, for online listening. And, you know, we may have a conversation that's 20 million mentions, but it only gives us 1 million of those with gender breakdowns, because it will only tell us what it knows. If it can't guess, it's not going to guess. It's only going to tell us what it absolutely knows. But statistically, in terms of relevance, 1 million is still quite good. We found out our data was out by about 40%. It was a very small sample size, which, yeah, probably very explain it. You really need to, I mean, there are all sorts of different statistical relevancy studies around Google Analytics and the various platforms. What the ad platforms themselves say is until you have a list of at least 1,300 people, they won't try to match your audience. So they want at least 1,300 people on a list for them to be able to actually analyze your audience and build a model of a lookalike audience for you. So I would think that's probably a little bit of a good rule of thumb. But in terms of sample sizes, yeah, if it's lopsided. But the other thing is that a lot of people do, and I don't know where you got that sample size from, Ellen. I don't know if that was from GA or if it was from internal analytics on your site. A lot of people don't block their own IP address. And so all of our customers, we block their IP address because we have a lot of customers who have 1,000, 2,000 employees. And the last thing we want is them constantly visiting the site and throwing off all the data. So we block it so that Google Analytics and Facebook Analytics, none of them are actually picking up the customer's data themselves, because that will seriously screw your results. Yes, we can get this kind of data from LinkedIn. LinkedIn Analytics is one of the best there is. You can only get it inside your account after running it. You can get a little bit in your account, but specifically after running a paid campaign. So it really wants you to run a paid campaign to get the return. We tell people a lot that if you want more insight, even if you do a cheap brand campaign, like on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn, the results you get from it are worth it, because it's a lot cheaper to spend £200 or £300 on a campaign than it is to go out and buy, pay £30,000 for NetBase. So I think there are ways to get even more insights just from running campaigns. Our Instagram shows 86% women, but yeah, that's exactly browsers versus purchasers, but it's also social purchasers only. So in analytics, it depends on it. And this is a great point. This was in the presentation and I took it out because I thought it was just too heavy. Maybe this is a second class, Michelle, I don't know. But in GA, if you're an e-commerce site, it automatically, there's a button at the top under goals that will show you where you can actually click on either converters only or e-commerce only. And once you do that, everything that it brings up is only people who bought from you. So not just the browser. So I suspect that if you actually go into that and just sort it, it's going to do exactly that.
Michelle, can we just read that question out, just so that if anyone's watching the replay of this, they might not be able to see the chat. But the question was, our Insta shows 86% women, but GA shows 56% female. Does this play into your point regarding browsers versus purchases? And how can I see the analytics in GA on purchases only? So I think you did just answer that question, but I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, but I think what I'll do is just add a tools slide at the end of this, so that when you send it out, there are things on there that people knew. And I'll add a screenshot of where you can look at converters versus general audience.
Amazing.
On GA.
Yeah, and I think
2 seconds.
And to add mention.com and any of the other kind of links and resources on that list as well, I think it'll be really helpful for people to have that as a resource list, and they can play around with each of the tools. Because I think a big part of this as well, even those, for those that do already work with agencies, is to kind of sanity check and build your own knowledge to a certain extent, so that you're getting value for money.
It also helps you to challenge. You're exactly right, Michelle. It helps you to challenge what your agency is telling you. A lot of agencies aren't necessarily motivated to be transparent with you because they bill by the hour, which is the reason we are the way they are, and we don't bill by the hour, because it's not the best way to work with partners. Our company has 63 shops and an online store. Our customer base is very different between the shops and stores. Do you have any suggestions with pairing the marketing to fit them both? Would you focus on one? You mean the website versus so focus on either the physical stores or the website? Chloe? Yes, physical website. I'm always going to say website, but that's my bias. But the other reason I'm going to say that is because the one way that everybody needs to think about their website is that's your 24/7 employee. You may be asleep, you may be on holiday. That website can still work for you. If the website is set up right, if the tracking is set up right, if the triggers are set up right to send messages and do all of the things that an e-commerce site can do for you, that should be working while you sleep, while you holiday, while you cook dinner. And so I think and especially if we didn't learn anything throughout lockdown, we learned that the digital world continued. And in fact, our business grew by more than 30% during lockdown. So, and you know, physical stores can't say that. So I would say I would focus on the digital side first, but then once you do that, there are ways to break out GA into physical locations so that you actually get data for physical locations, especially in GA4, which is the new version of Google Analytics that launches in July this year. You can break out locations within there and actually learn more about the locations and help tailor offers to people to bring people into the store. So you can use the digital push people to the store so that you're not really losing on either side.
The next one's from Karen.
Number one piece of data small brands should use to improve paid posts. Time of day, day of week, gender and age, the basics. If you only have a small piece of data, I would say that's what you want. But I think, you know, like mention.com again, it depends on what your product is. If your product is something that is niche enough that you can learn about it on somewhere like that mention.com, it's going to give you good insights too and probably help you craft some messaging. But I would focus on the fundamentals for a small brand, because hour of day, day of week, you know, gender and age groups are really super important for the way the platforms perform. Even if to you think they're more important, finite sort of characteristics, that's how the platforms function. So it's always going to be important. Yes, you got to switch to GA4. Good point. Anna said you got to switch to GA4 as soon as possible. GA switches over in July, but if you have somebody doing it right, all of your data from GA should port over to GA4. We've already done it for all of our clients. I'm just personally more comfortable in GA still at the moment, unfortunately. But it will you can port all of it over so that it'll all be there. You're not gonna, it is use it or lose it, but you have to do it before July. Are you having issues with Facebook ads? The data tracking has changed with yes, that's not just you, that's the entire world. And Facebook did release, so the question is, are you having issues with Facebook ads? Data tracking has changed with iOS. Our conversion rate has dropped a lot, and some ads won't run or get stuck in learning phase because the data set isn't large enough. They won't confirm that there's a specific problem. But they did put out warning signals for months before they said they were going to lose access to iOS data and tracking. This is something that everybody's having a hard time overcoming. Apple and Meta have never played well together. They play less well together now than they ever have. So we have had issues, but our guys have found a way to sort of overcome it a little bit. Cross-device attribution, as it's known, they've been talking for 13 years about perfecting it. It still hasn't happened. So it's still quite a difficult thing, but you can overcome it. All I would say is you may have to expand your audience just to get people back into the funnel so that you can then analyze it. Because if you broaden your parameters a little bit for your audiences to bring more people in for a short period of time, you're going to own that data set. So once again, even if you bring in 5,000 people and 800 of them convert, you have an 800 person list to start building of your own to then model against and build lookalike audiences. Lookalike audiences are so important. If you have, like I said, 12 to 1,300 people who are followers, likers, converters, whatever, those platforms will all model a lookalike audience for you that looks 99% like your audience and target them for you. So I would say that's really super important. And then, as we retailing multiple brands rather than individual brands, do you think GA can be equally? It's like, yeah, absolutely, because it's the person, it's not the brand. I mean, the luxury retailer that we just went through has, I can't even tell you, 2,000 brands at least. And GA still told us everything we needed to know. What we did is we started breaking every persona that you saw there that we listed, Timeless, Doyen, all the way down. Every one of them has a brand list that goes with it. So we know what brands they buy. We know what other brands they might be interested in. So yeah, it absolutely works. There's no question about it. It does take a lot of digging. And it takes your conversion tracking being set up correctly on your site too. Because if you know what people are buying in GA, it'll tell in the e-commerce section of GA, it will tell you what your top products are and what people are buying. And then you can see who those people are, what the demographics are. So maybe instead of looking at it the way that we've looked at it, just flip it on its head and go into the e-commerce section instead of the audience section and look at what products are your top products, and then click on them and apply the audience rule to that and see who's actually buying those. And I think that's all the questions.
Yeah, that's great. Does anyone have any last burning questions you'd like to pop in? I think we've got 3 minutes left. But that was really brilliant. And as we said at the beginning, we will share the presentation. Michelle's going to add a few bits to it, so we'll have those resource tools at the end. And we'll share the link to this recording as well as the actual presentation, so you can work through that again in your own time. And lots of lovely comments. Thank you, everyone. Michelle, massive thanks to you. And I mean, it was really, really interesting, and I think something that I need to go through and have a look at again, because I know we're working together, but it's really helpful for me to understand how all of this works. You know, I think so many of us bury our heads in the sand when it comes to the digital sides of our businesses, because for some other reason, like in my case, decide that it wasn't my generation. But actually it's so integral, and there can be so many small hacks and things that we can put in place that can make a massive difference into how much we know about who our audience is.
The more you know, the better your agencies are going to behave, because you know how to ask the right questions. Transparency is everything. So you want to, and don't be intimidated. I think a lot of agencies want you to be intimidated with data and information, because again, the more opaque they are with you, the more they can say you wouldn't understand. And Michelle and I had this conversation earlier. We find this especially with SEO specialists, agencies, whatever they call themselves, are intentionally opaque because they want you to freak out and think you could never understand it, because then you can't question how much they bill you for it. So the more you learn, the more empowered you are to have a good relationship and to get the most out of it.
And Michelle, just along that line, I mean, for those that are listening, if they're not getting results, does that mean that their partner is not working well for them, or that they need to change something up? Or...
I mean, I would certainly question it. And I said this to Michelle earlier, if anybody thinks their agency is not doing what they're supposed to do, we'll have a look at it for you. I'm not saying we could take on everybody. We are very, we want to look after every single client at the same level. It doesn't matter what size they are, who they are. We try to give everybody the same level of attention. So we're really careful about our balance. But we would be happy to tell you because I can't avoid it. I've seen so much waste that we would be happy to take a look and just say, this seems to be a problem. But I would say that the number one place that we see a problem is SEO. Just if anybody's a little bit nervous about it, or nervous of not seeing organic results, because ultimately, if your site's optimized perfectly for SEO, you're going to get organic results, which are free. And again, that's your always on sort of digital presence, and you want it to work for you. So yeah, I think that's a fair question.
Amazing, thank you. Well, we will be running at least 2 sessions around digital marketing as a whole, but kind of delving down into some really more specific topics based very much on Michelle's experience of where she sees businesses kind of missing a trick, or where they've been misinformed, or where they could be performing better and making their money work better for them. So we're going to be delving into those topics in subsequent sessions. So we'll keep you posted on those. But thank you so much, Michelle, for all of your time and effort in joining us today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. It'd be really good. We'll probably send, we will send a feedback link as well, because it'd be great to understand everybody's thoughts on the timing of today. Did that work? Is this the time you want the next session, so that we can make sure we reach the most amount of people? But we'll be following up with the recording and the presentation, and welcome your feedback and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for your attention. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant. And we've had lots of lovely comments here in the chat. So thank you so much, everyone. Look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you, Michelle.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.
I'll stop the recording.